Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Crochet by Kels. In today's video, we're going to be learning about how to skip stitches and work in chain one spaces. If you've seen my video on how to do a puff stitch, it'll be a little bit familiar. So here I've got my puff stitch row that I created. I just single crocheted across and then it did a puff stitch in each stitch across. So you can see how this is a little bulky. It is starting to curve, create a bend on me, and that is because I worked into every single stitch. So ideally when you're doing a puff stitch, you're going to skip stitches in between to space out your work. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But when you are done your row of puff stitches, for example, and you have chained up and ready to go work you back in the other row, you may wonder, where am I placing my stitches? Where am I working? If you pull apart your puff stitches, you'll notice when you chained one at the end of each puff stitch to secure it, you are now left with a chain one space. These are all the spaces in between your puff stitches, all the holes that you see. So when you work your next puff stitch for your next row, you're literally working in that big gap in your chain one space. You're not trying to push the hook into any of the stuff up here. You're literally working in the big gap. So to look like that, to show you what that would look like, I'm working right into that big gap. Just doing a puff stitch here, chain one to secure it. That's going to become my gap for this following row. So you can see here there's a gap. That would be where you're working your next stitch. So this is what they mean when they say to work in the chain one space from the previous row. These were your chain ones when we secured our puff stitches in the previous row, and that provides your foundation to work into for the next following rows. So I'm just going to do a couple here so you can see what that looks like. So you can see your second row. It's kind of almost like a brick layer. They're going to be slightly off from each other. And that would be working the chain one spaces. Now, to prevent your project from going all, bendy like that, generally what we would do, so this is called frogging it, by the way, when you pull everything out. I'm frogging my work. Ripping it all out. We're getting right back down to my basic single crochet chain. So usually what they would tell you to do is do a puff stitch, skip a stitch, then do a puff stitch. Anytime a pattern calls you to skip a stitch, it's usually because you're working a larger stitch and you can't have them all next to each other, because then it's too many stitches on your chain and your chain starts to bend like a rainbow, and we want it to lay nice and straight. So to do that, I would work my puff stitch into my next stitch as the pattern calls for. Chaining one there. I'm going to now skip this stitch and I'm going to work into the next one over here. So, don't mind my child. Work like that. Then I would skip this stitch and we would work right into the next one over here. And then I would be working into my last single crochet of the chain, which is over here. Oh, I'm having a snag moment. Happens to all of us. There we go. So now your project's going to remain flat. It doesn't have that bend in it, so that when we flip over, we'll still be working in these chain one gaps, but that keeps your project flatter. So you just have to follow your pattern, but that's kind of how you work into chain one spaces from your previous rows, as well as skipping stitches. If you're skipping stitches, even just with a single crochet, I'm starting to undo everything I've worked for here. Let me get back to my single crochet chain. So here we are, sorry about that. So if I wanted to skip a stitch, even if I'm just doing a single crochet or a double crochet, you're gonna do whatever your pattern calls for, right? So I might do a double crochet in the chain next to the hook here. Then they might say skip and do a double crochet in this one. Then they might say skip, do a double crochet in this one. And that's just skipping chains, really. So just go what your pattern calls for. I hope you guys found this tutorial helpful. I apologize for my toddler in the background. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.